I would like to thank the Animal Welfare Collaborative for inviting me to give a talk. My name is Dr. Kate Plush and I am the Science, Technology and Adoption Manager for the SunPork Group. I'm going to present you with some findings from our recent review into nest building behaviour in sows and the impact that it can have on the survivability of piglets. I would like to thank my co-author, Dr. Tanya Nowland from the South Australian Research and Development Institute, and I've listed our publication recently presented at the Australian Association of Animal Science Conference earlier this year. We have conducted a lot of research that I will present both internally in SunPork, but also with the CRC for High Integrity Australian Pork. I'd also like to acknowledge Australian Pork Limited, who are continuing to support the experimental work in this space. I think we all know that societal pressures impact livestock production, but more recently this pressure is resulting in real change. It would be easy for me to give you an example coming from Europe, but perhaps a better example closer to home is occurring across the ditch in New Zealand. A review of the Welfare Code for Pigs was conducted by the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, which is a federal department in New Zealand, and they have come back with significant proposed changes to this code. I'm going to give you 4 examples now, but these aren't exhaustive, so if you are interested, you can go online and check out the full code of recommendations. The first suggested change is an increase in space allowance, and I'm not talking about a small increase in space allowance. NAWC are regulating a 1.5 to 2.5 times greater amount of space given to every single progeny pig farmed in New Zealand. So this obviously means that we either have to double the amount of infrastructure we have to be able to maintain productivity, or if we operate within the same footprint and the same shed space we currently have, we would have to halve the amount of pigs we produce. The second example is an increase in weaning age of piglets by a week, from 21 days to 28 days of age. Again, this would have severe implications on productivity of the herd. The third example is a complete ban on mating stalls, which is an initiative designed to protect the sow from other riding sows who are exhibiting estrus, but also protect the stock person whilst they are inseminating the sow during this period. And then the last example is a complete ban on farrowing crates and replacing it with a significantly larger pen alternative. So for those of you that don't know what a farrowing crate is, I've included a nice picture there on the right hand side. And this just demonstrates that whilst the farrowing and lactation environment for the sow and piglet is quite large, we restrain the sow within a small footprint of that pen, A, to protect the piglets from being overlaid by the sow, which is a common occurrence, and B, to facilitate stock person safety whilst they operate, inspect and maintain the health and welfare of their piglets, so that they're not at increased risk of maternal aggression. The recommendations made by NAWC have been made with superficial at best understanding of the science. Now the impact on this locally is that the Australian Animal Welfare Standards and Guidelines for both poultry and pigs are at various stages of redrafting, so we need to make sure that these guidelines are evidence-based. Interestingly, NAWC has listed a requirement for enrichment and a specific mention of the word straw in 2 out of these 4 recommendations examples I've given you here. So why is enrichment so topical? It's largely driven by a shift in animal welfare assessment from the 5 freedoms towards the 5 domains model, with the largest change being in the incorporation of affective or mental state. It involves trying to limit negative interactions such as feeling cold, being hungry, experiencing stress, all of which are negative states, past the basic needs of animals being met, which is the neutral experiential state, towards a positive affect where, in the examples I've given you here, the pig could play, it can be aroused, it can bond, basically allowing them to do all the things that make them feel good. We believe that animal care is not finite, and so as science improves, we need to change the way we care for our livestock. Now, I'm familiar with the fact that not all of you might understand the common way that we farm pigs, and so I'd like to walk you through a commercial breeder sow herd, which is where we keep all of our females and our piglets whilst they're young. During each one of these specific reproductive stages, there are behaviours that can be facilitated and potential stressors that can be minimised through the use of enrichment. The first photo I have up here is of a typical weaning or mating shed where the sows are weaned into after they've reared their litter, and where they are moved into small groups until estrus is detected. So here they will receive daily fence line bore contact in order to stimulate estrus, and then once estrus is detected, they will move into the previous day. The second stage I've given you the example of here is in our gestation unit, where after breeding the sows are moved into larger groups into a gestation shed where they remain for their entire pregnancy, usually about 110 to 115 days. Here the sows are mixed into these larger groups, and so there's a risk of aggression which we can use enrichment to mitigate. And here I've got an example of an electronic sow feeding station which has been designed to also reduce aggression by feeding the sows individually. At the end of gestation, sows are moved into the farrowing shed, and this is where I'll focus the rest of my discussion today. And this is where they will move just before giving birth until after they have farrowed, and they'll remain here and rear their litter until the sows are weaned, where they place back into the gestation shed, the mating shed once more. Now we have opportunities, as I mentioned, to be able to use enrichment to facilitate natural behaviours and limit stressors through each one of these stages, but I'm going to talk specifically today about nest building, which occurs in sows just before they give birth. So nesting is an innate behaviour that still exists in commercial sows despite many, many years of domestication. Its specific purpose is to create an environment that's safe and it's warm and it's protective for piglets to be born into. And this is because baby pigs are small, they get cold really quickly, and they're easy targets for predators. It only ever occurs about a day before piglets are born, and you will not see it any other time in the reproductive cycle. And it involves the sows becoming restless, where they paw and nose the surroundings and any substrate they can get their hands on. The behaviour is driven by significant changes in endocrinology or internal changes in the sow. Onset results in an endocrine cascade which changes this internal environment. Now, the changes that occur internally in the sow are that cortisol levels are reduced and oxytocin and prolactin levels are increased. And this is again to create that safe environment for the piglet to be born into. Even domesticated sows that have farrowed up to 4 times in conventional surveillance farms, when given the opportunity, will still build a nest. Straw is the most commonly investigated nesting material, and this is for a really good reason. It is really successful at allowing nest building behaviours to be performed. In the figure that I've given you here, we have the control sows in the pink bar with no nesting materials, and in the gold, sows have been given access to straw before farrowing. What I hope you can see is that sows will use straw to build a nest. They'll push it around more, they'll arrange it with their noses and feet, and overall, they'll spend more time engaged in nesting behaviours. As a result, fewer stereotypies, which are frustration behaviours, can be identified. When sows use straw to build a nest, it promotes that internal environment I gave a description of before within the sow. In this figure, the solid line represents the sows that are given access to straw before farrowing. You can see that the time spent engaged in nesting is higher before the onset of farrowing or the birth of the first piglet, but after it declines rapidly. And this is because that through nesting, internal feedback mechanisms, through changes in cortisol, prolactin, and oxytocin, the sow then becomes calm to begin the birthing process. When the sows are not given access to straw, which is represented by the dashed line in this figure, they continue to try to build a nest after the birth of their piglets, which involves the sow getting up and getting down, being restless, and consequently posing a greater risk of piglet overlaying. Lo and behold, when sows are given straw to nest with, the desired outcome of improved piglet survival is achieved. Again here, the pink bars are control sows with no nesting substrate, and the gold bars are sows that have been given access to straw. And this figure clearly demonstrates that stillbirths or piglets that are born dead, piglets dying from starvation, and overall piglet mortality is substantially improved when sows nest with straw. So if straw is so effective, why haven't we adopted giving straw to farrowing sows across the pork industry? Well, it's because it poses significant risk to the health, safety and welfare of our pigs. First, it's a fire hazard and can easily fuel a catastrophic fire if ignited. Second, when we bring straw in, we also risk introducing any number of diseases that could be present in the straw, and we in the pork industry work extremely hard to maintain biosecurity in our herds. Third, straw is actually really hard to deliver and manage, and so that the sows can have constant access to it. And I've given a photo here of a sow that has pushed straw all out of her reach, and this will act to increase frustration levels. Last, straw clogs our drains, and when this happens, pen hygiene and cleanliness are negatively impacted. So we've invested quite heavily in finding an alternative to straw for these reasons that allow the sow to nest adequately, but also mitigate these risks. Hessian, otherwise known as jute or burlap, is a natural material that stimulates nesting to the same degree as straw, reduces stereotypies, which in this figure is indicated by bar biting, and also reduces pain-related behaviours caused by the farrowing process, and in this case we have measured tail flicking. As with straw, when the sows are allowed to build a nest, this should function to improve piglet survival. There's some evidence of this with Hessian, such as the reduced incidence or stillbirths or piglets born dead in the first figure. But the work that we've conducted here in Australia, Hessian is not as successful as straw at improving stillbirths or any other measure of piglet mortality after birth. We've given this a whole lot of thought, and we think that this is perhaps because the sows will eat the straw. When given the opportunity, pigs will consume up to 20% of their daily feed intake in straw, and straw is composed of 40% fibre. Fibre will act to bulk digester, which is really important for satiety and reduces hunger, which is important in our restrict-fed sows. It will alter gastrointestinal tract transit time, which changes energy release patterns. Again, this is important for sows who are fed only once or twice a day, a restrict volume, and expected to effectively run a marathon, which is what we liken farrowing to when they're giving birth to upwards of 14 to 18 piglets. And it also acts as an energy source for epithelial cells via fermentation, which may actually favour the types of energy metabolites that are available for running this marathon. Lo and behold, when we went and investigated the impacts of high fibre diets around farrowing on piglet survival, we came up with similar evidence on piglet survivability to that when sows are given access to straw to nest build. So, We've found an increased number of piglets born alive when sows were fed high fibre diets, and we think this is attributed to reduced constipation and so physical obstruction, sustained energy release that I mentioned before, and the production of short-chain fatty acids, which are a change in energy metabolites important for farrowing or running a marathon, and also a reduced oxidative stress, which is important for reducing stillbirths in sows. We also identified a decreased piglet mortality, which could be through increased satiety. So when the sows are less hungry, they would be less likely to get up and down and change positions, which would reduce the risk of piglet overlay. But also, when sows are fed high fibre diets, you see important changes in colostrum quality and intake by piglets. And colostrum is one of the key drivers of survivability, both in piglets but in other livestock species. And lastly, there is an increased number and weight of piglets that are weaned when fibre is fed to sows around farrowing. So I'd like to put forward that we can use nutritional enrichment for sows in the farrowing house in a similar way to a strategy that we've employed for our gestating or pregnant sows. The example I've given you on this slide has involved a great body of work conducted within SunPork, funded by the Pork CRC and commercialised by Ridley. Here is a picture of the sow enriched block, which is a nutritional enrichment that is as attractive to and maintains the interest of sows, as well as reducing stressful behaviours such as fighting to the same degree as providing straw. So in conclusion, there are alternatives to straw that better meets the needs of the animal, the system and the producer. And we hope we've demonstrated by showing you that allowing sows to nest changes behaviour and physiology of the sow to increase piglet survival. Sows will use a diverse enrichment sources to perform nesting, but only straw consistently results in improvements in piglet survivability. But straw is high in fibre, and high fibre diets also increase piglet performance. So are the impacts of straw at farrowing on piglet survival because of the nest building behaviour per se, or the dietary intake of fibre? We need to get a better understanding of the interaction between high fibre diets and straw enrichment during the nesting period, because I think herein lies the opportunity to provide a nesting enrichment other than straw in combination with a high fibre diet to achieve this best outcome for both the animal, the producer and the system.